This is our first time attempting to do live stream and video at the same time for one of these presentations. Um, so hopefully things are gonna go well. Let me say a very special thank you to Carleon and Saul for all the videoing, editing that they do for events like this. And thank you to Family Worship Center for allowing us to sit in this space and be able to space out some. And thank you to everybody that is joining us by YouTube, social media outlets. Today we're going to be talking about a cognitive approach to relationships. And there are 5 lessons which we'll go over. And those lessons include communication, conflict resolution, what a man needs, and what a woman wants, the contractual agreement, expectations for a relationship, and love languages. So I'm gonna pass out. I have some books. I got these books up here, if you don't mind. And I'll get Adon to pass those out. Everybody gets a workbook and just some administrative business. Restrooms are on this side. There's a men and women on this side. If we can get that taken care of, and then there are refreshments in the back. And I ask that in here, at least if you're spaced away, we're still trying to observe COVID-19 safety precautions as much as possible, even though there's enough space for all of us to be able to sit comfortably. Well, like I said, I do want to get this started, and there is I want some participation. We like for everybody to try to participate. That'll make it more lively, and if we can get participation, and then we may do 1 or 2 scenarios also, okay? So we'll put somebody on the spot and have them come up and model for us one of these sessions. So what I want to do right now is, from a therapeutic approach, when a couple first comes in and presents to you, and let me ask a question. What is the number 1 reason why couples come to therapy? Number 1 reason why couples come to therapy? Communication. If you haven't heard me say it, for the I don't know how many times, communication is the number. And they come to counseling for lots of issues, but as you pull back the onions of those issues, at the heart of that matter is communication, a failure to communicate. And just knowing that women and men are different in the way that their brains process things, you can expect that there will be some neurolinguistic issues, okay? When we talk about neurolinguistics, we're talking about just the way their brain processes information, the way we hear things, we interpret them differently. And so you can expect, and I always try to normalize that communication problems are a normal part of a relationship. But it is up to us as to how we respond to that and what we do with that poor communication. So our first lesson is on communication. And I don't want to read everything, so I would like if somebody else could read and help me out here. I'll tell you what I would do is I'll take these 2 mics here, and I'll pass these mics out. And if anybody, you guys help me out here with reading here, I'll start off. The number 1 problem, excuse me, the number 1 problem in most relationships, besides personality conflict, is communication. And this should not come as a surprise to most. Problems within most relationships can be traced back to poor communication. The fighting and arguing is not typical about the money or sex. It's not typically about the money or the sex. The fight is about the failure to be heard and respected in relationships. And how you argue, especially how you end an argument, can determine the failure or success of your relationship. So, disagreements are a part of any relationships. When we use the term term fight, it can be defined as an attempt to be heard, to find validation for feelings that you're experiencing at that particular moment. You have a right to speak your mind and to be heard, but you don't have a right to yell, scream, throw things, break stuff, or put your hands on people. And I'm going to slow that down some. While you have a right to say what's on your mind, and you have a right to state how you feel and why you feel that way and what you want to have happen, you do not have a right to yell, scream, throw stuff, break things, or put your hands on people. That you do not have a right to do. So you're entitled to give your feelings a reasonable voice, but it has to be in a constructive manner. There is a right and there's a wrong way for communicating and expressing oneself. And in the first session, when a couple presents, this is what you want to do. And couples may come in, like I said, they'll come in, sex is not good. The house is, you just hear all kinds of stuff as to why couples will come to session. And after you get through with that presenting issue, then as you begin to talk, you really find that it's about somebody not feeling validated, not feeling as if what they have to say or how they feel is being respected by the other person. So no matter what the issue is when they come in, I always take them through these 5 lessons. I take them through these 5 lessons because, again, this is a cognitive behavior approach to relationships. And if you teach people basic skills for communicating, for resolving problems, that's me going off. I'm wondering who's got their phone on. It's me. So if you teach them these basic skills, what you'll find is that a lot of their issues will self-resolve. And you don't have to work as hard. And even when they come in and say, well, we got to deal with this, I want to deal with this, I respect that as a provider. I'll tell them I respect that as a therapist. However, I think it's very important that we learn how to resolve issues constructively. So let's do this first, and then we'll address those issues, all right? I'll always start off with these 5 lessons first because, again, when you get through, you'll see that a lot of their issues will just automatically resolve on their own. And then you may need to help with just a couple of things, all right? So it's important to help them understand that communication is a typical issue within relationships. Normalize the problems that they're having, that they're not the only ones, because a lot of couples come in and they're at the end of their rope because typically they don't have anybody else to talk to sort of share what's going on. And so in their own head, they have catastrophized what's going on in their relationship, that they're the only ones that are experiencing this, and there's no help for them. There's no hope for them. And so we start talking about divorce at that particular time. But when you normalize their situation, normalize their issues, and tell them that communication is a huge problem for most of us, and it's something that we're just not taught to do. Most of us, we learn communication skills from our primary caregivers. We learn it from our parents who, shade on them, but who typically did the best that they could, but it wasn't always the best way to do it, all right? So keep that in mind. Much like an argument, or much like anger is a natural emotion, it is how we express it that makes it good or bad. The emotion itself is not necessarily good or bad, and I don't like to give emotions like a label, because emotions are emotions. They're healthy. We have them. God gave them to us. They're a natural part of who we are. It's what we do with them, though, that makes them good or bad, all right? So your emotions are your emotions. It's okay to be angry. And I think like setting the tone for people to be frustrated, letting them know that it's okay to be frustrated, it's okay to be angry, it's okay to be upset, it's okay not to feel comfortable, and normalizing that with them, it allows them to sort of let their guard down and then be a little bit more honest and transparent about what's really going on with them, all right? So lots of validation in that first session. You're going to talk about communication in that first session, and then talk about the forms of communication. And Irvin, if you don't mind, won't you read a little bit about what the 2 major forms of communication are?
There are two major forms of communication. Number one, nonverbal body language gestures. Number two, verbal, speed, tone, voice, inflection. Body language basics. Confident body language many include good posture, eye contact, smiles, gestures are purposeful, speech is slow and clear, tone of voice is moderate to low. Defensive body language may include hand, arms close to the body, facial expressions are minimal, eye contact is little to none. Deceitful body language may include rapid eye movement, hands or finger placed on lips or around mouth, complexion may change, voice may change, stutter or stammering may be heard. Remember that each person is unique and body language may have other underlying messages. An important factor in the counseling relationship is your awareness of the client's communication style and its basic message. Do you want me to keep going?
So when you are in that initial session, one of the things that you really need to be observing is the verbal and nonverbal communication that goes on. Albert Ellis said that through social learning, about 70% of what we learn, is what we see, from what we see. All right? So you can learn a lot about a couple just based upon their nonverbal cues within a session. And those are things that you certainly need to be documenting and putting into your notes is, how they're sitting, how they're responding to each other, if there's eye contact. And of course, all of that, you have to take into account cultural backgrounds and things of that nature. But for the most part, though, it's very important to note those verbal and nonverbal communication skills, all right, when they're sitting there. Remember, each person is unique and their body language may have other underlying messages. As an important factor, it is in the counseling relationship, it is the awareness of the client's communication style and its basic message. So there are four of them. Number one, there is the passive communicator. All right. So one of the things I want to try to identify very early on in that first session is what kind of communicators do I have? And I think it's important for them to know because remember, the more they know, the better they feel, and the better they are equipped with handling conflict with each other. So it's important for the individuals to know what kind of communication style that they have. So we talk about that passive communicator. This is the style in which the individual may have deployed a pattern of avoiding or expressing their feelings or emotions. Instead, they stuff them away, and as a result, passive individuals do not respond overtly to hurtful or anger-inducing emotions or situations. Once they have reached their high tolerance thresholds for unacceptable behavior, they are prone to explode. And you've heard the saying, back them up into a corner and they'll come out fighting is what they'll do. So that passive person will keep their feelings stuffed. They won't tell you exactly how they feel. They won't tell you. And I'm in session and I'm talking to people and I'm like, so tell me a little bit about what brings you here, and you'll get the shoulder shrug. That's what you'll get. You'll get the I don't know. And you can see it in their eyes that they can't even be open and honest in this session for fear of what may happen in this session. And so this is one of those times when it may be a good idea to to see them individually. Say, hey, you know what, I'd like to finish up your intake individually, alone, and try to create that safe, secure environment to get that passive person to talk to you, because they typically can become the doormats in relationships, all right? And they don't have a voice. So the passive communicator will say, believe, or behave like, I'm unable to stand up for my rights. I don't know what my rights are. I get stepped on by everyone. I'm weak and unable to take care of myself. People never consider my feelings. A passive communicator usually avoids eye contact. They do not like conflict and they will avoid it at all costs. The passive communicator tends to allow others to walk over them, and their basic message is my feelings, my thoughts, and my belief simply do not matter. That's the passive communicator. And then I'll say, so we'll go through all of these, we'll read each one, and then my question is, so which one are you? Which one do you think your spouse is? And you heard that conversation gets started very fast right there, all right? As to them trying to identify which one they are. And it's important for them to know which one they are, okay? So we have next that passive aggressive communicator. Reverend, will you read that passive aggressive communicator?
Passive-aggressive communicator. The passive-aggressive communicator is a style in which individuals appear passive on the surface, but are really acting out anger in a subtle and indirect way. This is the undercover aggressive communicator. People who develop a pattern of passive-aggressive communication usually feel powerless, stuck, and resentful. They feel incapable of dealing directly with the object of their resentments. Instead, they express their anger by subtly undermining the object, real or imagined, of their resentments. Passive-aggressive communicators will often mutter to themselves rather than confront the person or issue, have difficulty acknowledging their anger, use facial expressions that don't match how they feel, i.e., smiling when angry, use sarcasm, deny there is a problem, appear cooperative while purposely doing things to annoy and disrupt, use subtle sabotage to get even. The passive-aggressive communicator may sound passive, but the content is hostile in nature. They use sarcasm and gestures. They will verbalize agreement but sabotage efforts. Their basic intent is to make the listener feel that their message is important, but actually have the same intent as the aggressive communicator. It just sounds nicer when they talk.
And we all know people like that, right? I mean, you start to think about these basic skills we're talking about today, and it doesn't just happen within family dynamics, you know, within relationships with us and our significant others or our children, but it happens with your coworkers. It happens with extended family members. You will be able to pick up on those passive communicators and those passive-aggressive communicators. The next one is the aggressive communicator. And the aggressive communicator, it is a style in which the individual expresses their feelings and their emotions and advocate for their needs in such a way that it violates the rights of others. Remember, you have a right to state how you feel and why you feel that way. You have a right to express yourself, but you don't have a right to yell, scream, throw stuff, break things, and put your hands on people because it violates the rights of others. And when we talk about the aggressive communicator, this is exactly what their style of communication does. The only thing matters is how they feel, and they can care less about how other people may feel. And they don't have a problem with telling you that either. So they often are verbally and physically abusive. Aggressive communicators will often try to dominate others, humiliate them, criticize them, blame, or attack. They are very impulsive. They have a short fuse. They speak loud, demanding, and overbearing. The aggressive communicator will say or behave like this: I'm superior and right, and you're inferior and wrong. I'm loud, bossy, and pushy, and you're not worth anything. It's all your fault. The aggressive communicator tries to control or intimidate by yelling, threatening, or using a demanding tone or voice, and likely blames others. Their basic message is, my feelings are the only ones that count, regardless of the consequences. So keep in mind, and one of the reasons why we go through this is because we want them to be identified what kind of communicator they are, and then what kind of communicator their significant other is. And let me say this. Oftentimes, I'll have couples call and we'll do the pre-screening, and one of them, of course, is calling, and they'll say, but my significant other doesn't want to come to counseling right now. And I'll say, that's perfectly fine. They don't have to come right now. Let's get you in. Let's teach you some basic skills so at least you know what to do. Because what we have to do when we're dealing with couples, if we can just get one of them, we can teach them and then have them model the behavior that they want to see at home. You know, because it takes two clowns to fight, right? Right? One of us could just walk away. One of us could diffuse. One of us could say, you know what? If you want to fight, then I'm going to leave you to fight by yourself, but I'm not going to be party to that. So if you teach them and give them the tools that they need, then, and I always say, and I apologize, I wish your spouse was here. I wish your significant other was here. I'm sorry I have to put the burden on you, but I don't have them. I only have you. So I'm going to put the burden on you to model how to fight fair. I'm going to put the burden on you to be a good communicator. And in return, our hope and our thoughts and our prayers are that your spouse will see that. And then they'll be like, what's going on with you? Why you're not doing this anymore? And they'll be very inquisitive. And eventually, and I'm going to tell you, 9 times out of 10, I get that other spouse or significant other in the office. Because that one who presented first by themselves, their behavior has changed so much that it's astonishing to the significant other. And they want to know what's going on with them, what kind of drugs they're taking, kind of drugs I'm giving them. That's what they want to know. So they'll come in with questions, all right? So let's talk a little bit about the assertive communicator. And somebody read the assertive communicator.
All right, so the assertive communicator is a style in which individuals clearly state what's on their minds and give their feelings a constructive voice. They say what they mean and mean what they say. They firmly advocate for their rights and needs without violating the rights of others. These individuals value themselves, their time, and their emotional, spiritual, and physical needs. The assertive communicators will state needs and wants clearly, appropriately, and respectfully, express feelings clearly, appropriately, and respectfully, use I statements, communicate respect for others, listen well without interrupting, feels in control of self, has good eye contact, speaks in a calm and clear tone voice, have a relaxed body gesture, feels connected to others, feels competent and in control, not allow others to abuse or manipulate them. Want me to keep going?
No, you can stop there because so we have the assertive communicating, and we know that this is the most healthy form of communication. And I'll help people say, well, but this is how I was born. Passive, aggressive. And I'll say my response back to them is that just because this is how you was born doesn't mean this is how you have to be. Okay? We learn behavior. And while those first 5 sessions, you're not doing a lot of therapy, but what you're doing is you're psychoeducating people. You're laying the foundation that they probably didn't have a very good one in the beginning with, which is why they're in your office, all right? So you really want to help lay a very good foundation. And I'll tell people, just because this is how you were born doesn't mean this is how you have to be. We can teach you the skills that you need in order to be better at communicating. So we have passive, aggressive, and then we have the assertive communicator. And while the assertive communicator is the most healthy form of communication, you'll watch people sort of vacillate back and forth between those. But keeping in mind and then training other people to become couples, individuals, and families to become better assertive communicators is the goal here, all right? And the number one way in which we start that process is I will teach I statements. I statements to the couples, and I'll give them homework, for example, on what I statements are, all right? So I statements are where you get to state how you feel, why you feel that way, and what you want to have happen. It doesn't mean that things are going to go your way and you're going to get exactly what you want, but you got to remember the number one reason and why we watch couples escalate from verbal arguments into yelling and screaming is because they don't feel as if what they have to say or how they feel is being validated by the other person. And when that happens, you'll watch the voice go an octave higher. And as the voices go an octave higher, what else goes higher? The blood pressure, the adrenaline, the cortisol is pulsating through their body. And so then you'll see people even get more aggressive now. And then you'll turn into, get the screaming, the slamming doors, and the breaking things is what they'll do. So teaching people I statements is one of those ways in which you teach people to validate their own feelings and thoughts, even if their significant other doesn't have the capacity to do that just yet. The goal is to teach them, but We can start with the individual, though. That's what we can do. It's by using those I statements and stating, I feel sad when I come home and you don't touch me. I really would like for you to touch me and make me feel safe. All right? And now that person gets to validate how they feel. They stated why they feel that way and what they want to have happen. Now, whether or not the significant other goes, I'm very sorry about that. I was just busy, and then they touch them and caress them, and so that's how they get to validate them. But a lot of times we know that that doesn't happen. People, for lots of reasons, are distracted. They're not present when they come home, and so what you can do now is you can teach both parties to validate their own feelings and their own thoughts, okay? And the goal there is that if they're validating their own feelings and their own thoughts, it doesn't mean they're getting what they want, but at least they're not being triggered into an escalation of feelings, emotions that can, spiral out of control and end up into a big fight, right? So teaching people those I statements are very, very important. And this is how you become more assertive. Remember, the assertive communicator respects how they feel and how you feel both equally. They're the same. But they're going to look out for themselves. And they're going to tell you how they feel. They're going to tell you why they feel that way and what they want to have happen. Now, what you do with it, because we can't control people, but we can control how we respond to them. That we do get to control. We can't make them apologize. We can't make them do better. We can't make them respect how we feel, but we certainly can control how we respond, though, and validate our own feelings and our own emotions. Any questions? Yes, Reverend. Yeah, and I think you can have that, but what I do in such as I don't let other people get to define the other person. If they say that they're passive, then they're passive. I can tell you what the science says. Even for me, I have people say, well, I'm not aggressive. Well, you may not be aggressive, but this is what I have in front of me, and from my past experience, you meet all these criteria, but if they're not aggressive, then they're not aggressive. Because their perception is what? Their reality. And now you're going to argue with them and tell them that they're not. And so I will not allow couples to define the other couple in the relationship. If they say that they're passive, then that's what they are, passive. And the goal here is to eventually teach them, lay out in black and white, yeah, you really are aggressive. You're not passive. But yeah, absolutely. You can have that in session. But again, this is where you really want to, just giving them this information will allow them to become better at what they're trying to do. And that is to express themselves in a safe, secure environment. Okay? Yeah. Any other questions about the? Okay. All right. So let's, after each session, you certainly want to make sure that you're giving homework to reinforce those new tools that you're using, all right? Reinforce those new tools that you're using. And we have some homework here in this workbook. And this workbook, I want to thank Tina. I know she spent a lot of time on preparing these, putting them together. They are available to us, and you can search. All of this material is available in our PDF and our shared drive, and you can upload this information to the patient's record so they can have homework after each session. And you see here there is communication is a luxury to be understood, and then give them this homework right here. It's got some I statements in the back of it, and then I will have them come back the next session, and then what I will do is we will literally go over that homework. So while we got 5 sessions, but that doesn't mean in 5 visits you're going to be done. Because depending upon how much information is being exchanged and how much teaching you are doing, you may have 10 sessions, 10 visits for those 5 sessions is what you could have. All right? literally 10 visits for those 5 sessions that you're doing. So they want to bring that homework back in the next session, and then you want to go through that homework and you want to check for deficiencies in the way they think. You want to check for roadblocks. You want to check to make sure that there is a clear, concise, mutual understanding of what's expected in communicating and then the homework that was shared, because you don't want to just move on to the next session and they really don't have it. And I know in an integrated behavioral health setting, we typically move, we only do a few sessions, not a few sessions, but we do a minimum amount of sessions. But when you're teaching somebody, though, you got to remember that each brain is different. The way men and women learn is differently. So it may take you 2 or 3 sessions to actually get that information out to where you have the up and down, the I understand. All right? Because a lot of times if they're silent, they probably don't understand, but they're just afraid to say something. And so you got to probe a little bit more, use those interviewing skills and probe a little bit more to get information out of them to ascertain whether or not they truly understand what the expectation is, okay? When we talk about communication styles. All right, let's take a break here and session 1, and then we'll come back, we'll start with session 2. All right, welcome back. Session 2, dirty fighting techniques, all right? Dirty fighting techniques. How to fight fair in love and relationships. And in this particular session right here, we talk about there is a right and there's a wrong way to fight. I believe that fighting is normal. Again, I'm going to normalize fighting. And when we talk about fighting, I know that that term can scare people off because they've probably been in a domestic violence relationship. They probably, had some trauma when we talk about fighting. But when we talk about fighting here in love and relationship, we're talking about the communication style. We're talking about the tongue. We're talking about how we fight with words, all right? So when we talk about how to fight fair, there is a right and a wrong way to do it. And I want to go over the dirty techniques first, and then I'll tell the couple that, this is sort of a tongue-in-cheek. You'll see people laughing. You'll see people getting very, very upset because they can recognize each other or the other person in this particular list here, all right? And we'll go down one by one. And here's what I'll do. Instead of me reading it all, I have the couples reading. They take one, he takes one, she takes one. I'll take one. And then we'll just go back and forth. And then I will actually stop. And one of the things I'll caution you on doing, because you can open up a can of worms, is do not ask, do you see your husband in this? Do not ask it, do you see your spouse in this or your significant other in this? Don't say this, but I have them think about it. They'll just think about a time or somebody where you've seen this particular style before, all right? That's what I'll have them do. And they will start, yeah. And then what I like to hear is, oh, wow, that's me. I do that a lot. Wow, man, I do this all the time. And you can see others. That's what I want to see. Ownership, taking responsibility for our dirty fighting techniques. And remember, I believe that you don't have to be taught how to fight dirty. It becomes very natural to you. Nobody, as a matter of fact, nobody was born with a natural propensity for how to fight fair. We sort of were born, and it's innate within us to be dirty fighters. It's the survival instinct within us. It's the fittest within us that, you know what, I gotta take care of me. Number one is what I gotta do. And regardless of how other people feel, and so it's very common to see people, and where did you learn this? And they can't tell you where they learned it. They just know it, all right? And normalize that with them in that second session when you talk about how to fight fair in love and relationships. So look at this. Dirty fighting makes an argument even worse because it is verbally and emotionally abusive. When people use unfair fighting techniques, they disrespect themselves and the other person by using manipulation and control tactics. Below is a tongue-in-cheek description of some of the ways in which we fight dirty. Which dirty fighting technique have you used, and how did you feel when you used the dirty fighting techniques, and how do you suppose the other person felt? And I'm gonna say this, that when we do fight, we don't fight with people we don't care about. You notice that? We don't sit down and have long, drawn-out fights with people who we have no skin in the game with. You will walk away. You're like, I'm not going to waste my time with this. But somebody who you love and you care about, you will stay there, and you will tooth and nail. You will dig in, and you will fight that issue is what you will do. And so keep in mind that we fight because we care. We fight because we want the other person that we care about to hear us and to validate how we feel. So normalize the fight is what you want to do, all right? And I say this because I want you to consider that when you read through these dirty fighting techniques and think about how you felt when you use that, and I want you to think about how the other person felt when you use these dirty fighting techniques, because you say you love them, you say you care about them, but then when you use dirty fighting techniques, that doesn't mesh up with what you say. And so now we have a problem. What you say does not match up with your actions or your behavior. So let's read. And use the mic when you read. Somebody read the first one for me, dirty fighting. Oh, I'm sorry, I read that one. Let's read the second one. Why listen when you can ignore?
Why listen when you can ignore? Beware. If you listen to your partner, it might look as if you respect your partner's thoughts and feelings. Instead of giving your partner the common courtesy of listening, pretend to be watching TV, reading the newspaper, or falling asleep. The more serious the topic of conversation, the more you should ignore your partner. Eventually, your partner will stop speaking to you, and you'll finally get the peace and quiet you deserve.
So why listen when you can ignore, all right? And keep in mind that when you do this, when you use this particular dirty technique, your thought is really to have the person sort of tire out so they will leave you alone eventually. But when they do leave you alone, I think you need to be concerned about that. Remember, because the reason why we fight is to express ourselves to the person that we love and we care about. So when they stop and they leave you alone, that's a disconnect. That's when you really should be concerned that they're no longer doing that, all right? So why listen when you can ignore? Go ahead, let's look at the second one here, negative labels.
Negative labels. By labeling others in abusive ways, you can decrease their self-worth to dust particles. Continue to use negative labels until the other person actually believes he or she is truly an idiot or a loser. If you use psychological labels like neurotic and borderline, you will seem superior to the other person.
Yeah, we really have. This is one of the really big ones that I see problems with. And I'm going to just be honest with you. I see it used more commonly within men. Men like to use psychological labels when being verbally and emotionally abusive toward women. They'll tell them, you're borderline, you must be bipolar, things like that is what and I'm thinking to myself, oh, I didn't know you had a doctorate degree or a master's degree in counseling or psychology. Well, I searched it on the internet and it says she got, oh, okay. Well, I can tell you she's not borderline, I can tell you she's not bipolar. So, but be careful with that though, using those labels to describe your partner. You really tear at their self-worth when you use those negative labels, okay? And of course, there's trading places. When your partner brings up something you have done, immediately turn the table and complain about your partner. For example, if your partner is angry because you've been flirting with other people, say something like, if you hadn't gained 10 pounds, I wouldn't have to flirt. Right? You see those couples that turn the table on, literally turn the tables on. They've been caught in doing something wrong. Well, if you hadn't, and we'll turn the table completely around. in order to sort of throw the attention off themselves. And we all sort of laugh, and because we've seen this before. We all sort of smile a little bit because we've heard this before, or we've even used it ourselves before in a fight or two, right? Let's look at the one with baffle them with complaints.
Okay. Baffle them with complaints. The next time you argue with a person, don't stick to the issue at hand. Complain about other issues, especially if they happened a long time ago. If the other person doesn't remember the past offenses, you are in luck because it will look like he or she is also having memory problems.
Yep, another really common one that you'll have is, why? I'm getting into the why inquisition. We'll talk about it a little bit, but where they'll keep saying the same thing over and over and over again. You say one thing, and then they have a whole list of complaints, in which they would just a barrage of complaints. All right. So the next time you argue with a person, don't stick to the issue at hand. And you'll notice how, like, you'll be fighting about respect. But man, they brought in your mom, they're talking about your family, they're talking about all kinds of stuff, and they're deflecting the issue at hand is what they're doing by just, again, that barrage of complaints is what they'll do. So these are the ones that we really don't have to be taught. Remember I said that we don't have to be taught about these. They really come very natural to us. And I'll let them go ahead and read each one. We'll talk a little bit about them is what we'll do. We don't spend a lot of time on the How to Fight Fair because I'll tell them, you're already an expert in this particular field here, all right? But I'm gonna teach you how to do this the right way because clearly this is the wrong way to do it, all right? Let's look at Play the Martyr Road.
Play the martyr role. Manipulate the other person into feeling sorry for you by recounting every slight hurt you've ever felt in the relationship. Include plenty of details so the other person can't get a word in edgewise. Sound hurt and self-righteous so you can justify any selfish behaviors of yours. For example, since you got the second job and are never at home, I had to buy the widescreen TV to keep me company.
Right? And these are real. These are real. These are real. These are real. These were not made up, okay? Fight time. If you want to win an argument, pick the worst time to go for your partner's throat. Argue late at night or when the person is ill or tired, or just before the person is leaving from work. Start an argument when the other person least expects it, and he or she will feel defenseless. You know, we always talk about how, like, there are clearly some bad times to bring up situations, to discuss issues. If a person is sick, they don't have the strength to defend themselves, to advocate for how they feel. Like, you don't do that when somebody's sick. You don't do that before they go to work. You don't do that. Imagine that, fighting before they go to work. And then what if something was to happen to them on their way to work? What if something was to happen to you on their way to work? All right? And this big old huge fight. And that's how your relationship ends. But we have people who come to therapy all the time because of issues like this. I remember one particular lady saying the fight she had with her mom was a horrible, horrible fight. And now she's in therapy because that's how their relationship ended when her mom died. Her cursing, screaming at her mom, and there's no way to resolve that now. So fighting at just the worst time whatsoever. Let's look at the why inquisition. This is the one that I gotta admit, if I could be just a little self-transparent parent, this used to be me right here, the why. Why? The why inquisition. Somebody want to read that one?
Overwhelm your partner with meaningless why questions. For example, why were you late? Or why didn't you take out the trash? By asking why, you're implying that something's terribly wrong with the person instead of a simple problem behavior. If you sound like an authority figure, your partner has to answer as if he or she were a child explaining naughty behavior to a parent.
Yeah. All right, so now let's look at the healthy fighting techniques. And we got 10 of those. And this again is where I will normalize the fighting with the couple. I will tell them that fighting is not a bad thing. It's just how we do it that makes it good or bad. And that because we're an expert at dirty fighting, we have to actually be taught how to do it the right way. And we'll go down each one of these step by step, number by number, checking for clarification, checking to see if they have any questions, making sure they clearly understand this. And then another thing that you can do is you can check with the couple to see, has there ever been a time in their life where they've done this right here, where they've used this, or where this could have been used, or where this worked very well for them, because you want them to make those emotional connections to times when they actually did use this, or times where they didn't use this and that's what it came in handy, because then we plant that into their minds, we plant that into their memories, so when that comes up again, they can reach back, make that emotional connection, and pull this tool out, okay? So disagreements are going to occur. The question is, do you go into it with a spirit of looking for resolution, or do you go into it with a spirit of getting even, vengeance, or control? You'll never win if you do that. When you make a relationship a competition, that means that somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. It's not a competition, it's a partnership. Relationships are about partnership. And I'll check with the couple to see, like, how do you view your relationship? How do you view your interaction with each other? You know? Because when they are complaining about each other, trying to make each other look like the worst person, one of the things I'll say, well, if you think that about him, what does that say about you? Because you chose him. You married him. If you really believe that about her, then what does that say about you? Because it's not a competition here, you know? It's a partnership. So if you feel that way about her, then you're probably the one who needs the help then. Maybe we should dismiss her. And you and I just talk, if you really feel that way, you know? Unless it's a prearranged marriage or somebody held a gun to your head and made you get into a relationship with them, you chose this person, you know? So you got to break it down for them, really. And we talk about it being a partnership. Think about that when one person has to lose in a fight, everybody loses. Everybody loses. The children lose when they're involved. Friends lose. Okay? You both lose. When somebody has to lose in a fight, there is no winner. Okay? And this is really hard to get around people's mindset because they've been brought up in those very competitive transactional relationships, and I don't think anything is wrong. I don't think anything is wrong with a transactional relationship. I don't think if that's what you had a clear expectation for when you got together, they can work very well. You know, transactional relationships can, but that's how they work. But when you come together and you talk about being this family as one and everything being shared equally, then it's a little different here. There is no winner or loser here. When one person loses, we all lose. Go ahead, Adon. So Don wants me to describe what a transactional relationship is. A transactional relationship is really where you have a couple who sort of live their own independent lives of each other, and they have agreed to come together for, you know, lots of reasons, because it makes sense. They one person has money and is able to provide for the other person who could not do that sufficiently on their own, and so they got together knowing that this is how the relationship was going to be. It was not going to be sort of your money is my money and it being equal across the board, but there is this clear this clear expectation that this person's, what they do and how they live their life will be completely separate from the other person and how they live their life. So there's not a lot of accountability. Typically, you'll see separate bank accounts. You'll see separate friends. There's no commingling of friends. When we talk about transactional relationships, they can be where even some arranged marriages can be transactional in nature, where it is thought that one particular person in the relationship will have all the power, will make all the decisions, and the other person is just sort of there alone. I would like to say to be supportive. Typically, it just doesn't happen a whole lot where they are supportive. They're there for a reason. They're there because this person can do something for them. And so that's what I mean by transactional relationship. And I don't want to disparage transactional relationships because, they can be very successful. You just got to know that that's what you're getting into. You got to have an expectation that that's how this is going to work. It can't be you're getting into a transactional relationship and you're thinking, oh, we're going to be partners. Oh, we're going to share everything, have everything in common. That's different. That's different than a partnership. Yeah, it's very transactional. It's like you do this, I do that. You do this, I do that. You pay half, I pay half. That's transactional in nature. It can work. It can work, yeah. It can work. You just got to know that that's what you're getting into. So it's not really about love. It's not really about, us falling in love and wanting to share everything commonly. It's like much like a business relationship. And again, I don't want to disparage that because I think that can work. It can work. It can work. You can be in relationships without being in love. Go ahead, Joanne.
Sometimes I notice that certain cultures are trans.
And that's why I talk about the prearranged marriages, the prearranged relationships. Man, they have great success. They really do. The only time they sort of spiral is when they come here. It's when they come here to, I love this country. I love the United States of America. I do, but we have a way of really undermining and weakening that system that they come here from. There are some places in the world where those transactional relationships do very well. And then after being here in America and you talk, well, you have your own voice, you have your own right, and you're entitled to this. And then you hear that after living in America so long, you start to believe that. So, and then you'll see those transactional relationships start to weaken because of that. But they can work. Again, I go back to it just has to be something that you have a clear expectation of when you go into that relationship. Yeah, absolutely. So let's look at number 2 here. So we've got the 10 steps for fighting fair. 10 steps for fighting fair in love and relationships. Number 2, take it private and keep it private. Somebody read that.
This is take it private and keep it private. Fighting in front of your children is nothing short of child abuse. It can and will scar them emotionally, all because you don't have the self-control to contain yourself until you can talk privately.
So the DOD, Department of Defense, has always had this rule in place for at least 20 years or so, if not more. I'm sorry, I think over 20 years. That fighting in front of your children is a form of child abuse. And the reason why we don't fight in front of our children is because their brains simply do not have the capacity to rationalize and make sense of a fight between mommy and daddy. Children typically will do what? Internalize their internalized issues. So instead of being able to say, oh, this is just a fight between mommy and daddy, it has nothing to do with me. They still love me. When they see mommy and daddy fighting, they internalize that it's about them. And so it really is a form of abuse. And here's where you want to make it clear. There's a right and there's a wrong way to fight. And fighting in front of your children is always wrong, especially when you do it an unhealthy way, especially when there's yelling, screaming, throwing, fighting of that nature. Now, you can fight in front of your children, and I do encourage that, but you have to do it the right way because, again, you get to model that behavior that you want to see in your children. So if you want them to be good fighters and healthy about their communication styles, then that's what you do in front of them. But when you do it unhealthy, then trust me, children will learn the unhealthy form of fighting. And hence why you're here today, because you watched somebody do it unhealthy, right? And so we're trying to break that cycle is what we're trying to do. You had a question?
Okay, so I typically have a problem explaining to clients, like you said, about the take it private, keep it private. Like you said, you're modeling good communication to your children. However, sometimes when you typically tell a couple clients, okay, take it private, keep it private, don't argue in front of the children, then they start to model bad behavioral and body language. So how do you go about explaining to them, we still don't want to show the children that we're mad at each other, even though we're not verbally communicating? How do we go about explaining to them that even though they just got in a confrontation and the children are there, let's figure out a way not to kind of like shift the environment? Because, you could feel that tension, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're watching, so you think just because you're not verbalizing the fighting, the unhealthy fighting techniques in front of the child, that most of what children learn is by watching. Only 30% is what they hear, 70% of it is what they actually see you doing. So those nonverbal communication skills that you use are just as impactful as the verbal communication skills that you use. And so what you want couples to be able to do is you want to be able to resolve those problems as soon as possible. You want to be able to address those issues as soon as possible. So if you can take it private, and when I talk about taking it private, I mean taking it private from, I'm going to come back to you, I'm just going to explain a little bit here. Take it private from your in-laws, from your mom and your dad, from your sisters and brothers, and from your girlfriends and your boyfriends. Take it private unless you have somebody who can be objective, who can hear you, who you can bleed on, and they won't go, girl, you're right. Man, if I was you, I would leave. You don't want somebody like that to be talking to, because what will happen is that they will become mad at your significant other, and you've forgiven them. And so now you put them in an awkward position where your mom is still mad at him, your dad is still mad at him, your friends are still mad at him, but you lovey-dovey with him now. And now you're upset with them because they won't get over being mad because you over being mad. So simply don't share what happened between you two. Don't share that with people who cannot be objective, who cannot love you both, who cannot want the best for you. All right? Because parents have a natural inclination to side with their children, right? It's inherent within them to want to protect their own child. You are just a son-in-law. You are just a daughter-in-law, okay? They don't have a natural affection for you. You were married into this family, okay? So we talk about take it private and keep it private. When you fight, I always suggest go behind closed doors, have that fight. State how you feel and why you feel that way. Discuss things, get it out in the air. Even if you can't resolve it, at least get it out where you can lower now the tension that you're carrying within you that comes off in that negative body language, where you're slamming stuff, where you're grunting, At least have a conversation, even if that conversation doesn't lead to resolution. All right, get it out so at least you can lower that now and then continue to re-engage again. So address those issues as soon as possible. Take it private, keep it private, deal with it. And then if you find that that's not helping, that's not working for you, you may need to give somebody like a professional involved that can help you do that. All right? Because again, we're simply just not born with the natural propensity to do this the right way. We have to be taught how to fight. And there's so much research and so many lessons that have been learned when we talk about psychology and human behavior, that we've come a long way now. We have the tools. There's no excuse not to do it the right way now, because the resources are there. The books are there. all right, to learn to do better and to be better as an individual, as someone who's in a relationship. So when we talk about take it private and keep it private, remember that you want to be able to discuss your business. And let me say this, because I know that some things we talk about, like it should stay private, it should stay at home, what happens in our house stays in our house. I'm not talking about abuse now, okay? Abuse, it needs to be exposed. You need to tell somebody. That needs to be dealt with, all right? And if however you address that issue, by going to a clergyman, by talking to a friend, your parents, somebody, you need to be able to share that. What I'm talking about is those things that when you are fighting with an intimate partner, and we're talking about the verbal fighting. When you're talking with an intimate partner, what you don't want to do is to speak bad about that partner to other people, because especially people who have a close relationship with you, what will happen is they will feel a certain kind of way toward your partner, and eventually what happens is that you will forgive them, but that's not easy for them to forgive, all right, because you've been hurt. So that's what we mean by taking it private and keeping it private. If you need to share, you want to share, I encourage sharing, but you want to do it with somebody who can be objective, who can love you both. You want to do it with somebody who can say, yeah, you were wrong. You were wrong. You need to fix that. You need to apologize for that. You want somebody who will tell you the truth, regardless of how you feel. Who won't just say, oh my goodness, you're so right. If I was you, I would do, like that's right there. That's a red light. That's a sign right there. And you people, if I was you, it's like, oh wow, that's a red sign right there, okay? Because guess what? They're not you. They don't have the same experience or anything with that person. You and your spouse, you have a fight. You and your significant other, you have a fight. But you got to look, that's one fight among hundreds and hundreds of good experiences. But then you have that one bad fight is what you have. And that's the fight that your mother, your siblings, and your friends will hold on to. It's that one bad fight. They don't have the experiences of those hundreds of good experiences that you've had with them. And so this is the reason why you want them to take it private and keep it private and encourage them. And that's why you're here. I'll be that objective ear. I always let the couple know when they first come in, they present, I make it abundantly clear that first initial session. Bob, I just need you to know I do not work for you. You are not the client here, okay? So I'm going to say things that you're not going to like, that you're going to simply disagree with. Mary, same thing. I just need you to know that I am going to say things you do not like. I'm going to say things you do not agree with, but I'm not here for you. You understand me? And they're both looking at me bewildered. Like, what? We're paying you and you're telling me you don't work for me? Like, yes, I do not. If you're here as a couple, who do I work for? The relationship. That's the client. The client is the relationship. Not Bob, not Mary. They are part of this, but the relationship is the client. That's who my obligation is to. So, in doing what's best for the relationship, that means that I'm going to call Bob out on stuff that he is not going to be okay with. I'm more than likely going to call stuff out with Mary that she is not going to be okay with. And that's okay, but they need to understand that I will tell them what is best for the relationship. Hands down, no questions. I'm going to always tell you what's best for the relationship. All right? So we need to make that abundantly clear. Let's look at keep it real. Somebody read that one for me.
Keep it real. Deal with the issues at hand, not with the symptom of the problem. Get real about what is bothering you, or you will come away from the exchange even more frustrated.
So when we talk about deal with the issue at hand and not with the symptoms, you'll notice that most fights are about the symptoms. You'll have couples go round and round in session with you. And you're like, you're fighting about dirty dishes. She didn't pick up your clothes from the cleaners. What? is that why you're here? And you're like, I got people who need me, and you're fighting about dirty. Dirt, really? Because that's what we'll do. We'll fight about the symptoms instead of really dealing with the issues at hand. And you've got to be skillful enough to be able to identify what's called the implicit and the explicit contract. The implicit contract is what they don't tell you with their words. It's what they don't share with you in that initial presentation. When they first come in, they'll tell you, oh, we're having it's this horrible relationship, and we've just been fighting so much, and we've been fighting about the kids' school, and we've been fighting about this, and we've been fighting about, and you'll have the explicit contract, what they tell you as to why they came. That's what they say out of their mouth. But then the implicit contract, what they don't share with you, that is what's important, not what they say out of their mouth. It's what they're not telling you, and you need to listen to what they're not telling you. You're fighting about dirty dishes? Really? So what's behind the dirty dishes? Again, you're pulling those onion layers back is what you're doing. And you get to the heart of the matter, you find out it's really about respect. She don't feel respected. She feels like she has to do everything. She's the only one that's working 2 jobs. She's taking care of the kids. She's taking care of the house. And he just has one job, and he checks out as soon as he gets home because he says his job is so hard and, so demanding, and he checks out. And so what she is really feeling, when we really get down to the heart of the matter, is that she doesn't feel respected for what she brings to the table. Because he always talks about how he pays all the bills, how he does all this. But what he doesn't take into account is the insurmountable work that she does. I always tell wives, I'm sorry, not wives, but I always tell female, they got 3, typically average family is about 2.5. They got 3 kids, a dog, 4 goldfish, all right? You talking about a family? All right, that woman has like 5 or 6 jobs. And you have one job. You have one job, and yes, it's demanding, but you gotta look, she's taking care of all 3 of your kids, the dog, the goldfish, the house, and you. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work to be doing. And when you really get down to the heart of the matter again, you find out that she doesn't feel respected. So when we talk about keeping it real, you need to deal with the issues at hand and not with the symptoms. Get real about what's bothering you, or you'll walk away from the exchange even more frustrated. So that's why I say we got to get to the heart of the matter here. What's really bothering you? And it may take you again, a little time to get into that. But once you really talk about what's bothering you, once you really make the space a safe space to share, and that's why I always tell them what we talk about in here, especially in the beginning, don't take it out of here. Once you leave my office, don't go home and fight about this. We only fight about that here until I can teach you how to do that in a way to where you can do it at home and when you leave here. Because right now, you sort of have to be that referee. You have to be able to say, unhealthy, you can't do that, and time out. As the therapist, you need to be able to set the tone for them, to be able to open up and to honestly share what's going on with them, okay? And discourage fighting about stuff that you talk about here when you go home. Only in here do you do that until we can teach you how to do it the right way. And then, of course, the whole goal here is that after these 5 sessions, we want them to fire us. That's what we want them to do. And like, you know what? I think we got this. Thank you. We got some skills. We can do this. We can do this on our own. And you gotta look at most of the patients that come to us, they are very high-functioning professionals. And so they don't need a lot of work. They don't need a lot of work. They don't need a lot from us. They need some very basic skills, some tools, and then they become their own therapists. And that's the goal of this particular training, of this particular workbook, is to really teach couples to become their own therapists, a cognitive behavior approach to relationships. Because if they know how to shift and have that paradigm shift in their thought process when it comes to each other, when it comes to conflict resolution, when it comes to communication, once you do that, they will fire you because they can handle this on their own, okay? So, again, fighting about the issues, you need to get past that really quick. It's what you need to do and get down to the heart of the matter. And I'll say most importantly here is that you want to find out what that implicit contract is. What do they really want by coming here? And what she really wants by coming here is to have her husband respect the work that she does. Yeah. It's really not about dirty dishes. Any questions? Okay. It's very helpful. It's very, because, you know, and I'm a male, and I'll be honest with you, we can have a hard time with that, you know, as guys. We really can. We can have a hard time with people telling us what to do. We can have a hard time with being wrong. And we can have a hard time with really expressing ourselves because our culture is not lending or sensitive or helpful in that nature. We, in the American culture, we are taught to kill and destroy. We're taught not to, and you can't do that with emotions. You can't do that with feelings, you know. So we overdo it when it comes to little boys. Like, they're not allowed to play with coloring books and dolls and to show feelings or to cry. They're taught they need to join the military, they need to play with trucks, they need to smash and destroy stuff. Boys will be boys, you know? Like, it's okay for boys to fight. Can't have a girl fighting, though, you know? And you need to apologize and say, I'm sorry, we tell little girls. But boys, just suck it up. You'll be okay. You know, so with that type of training and embedding into young men typically, they have a hard time with saying I'm sorry and with being transparent and with being honest. And so if you're modeling that in session for them, then you can let him know that it's okay for him to do that. And then I'll ask, when we talk about the implicit and explicit contract, I'll say to, you know, Bob, so I just heard Mary say that she feels as if she's the only one that's working 2 or 3 jobs. And so when you hear that, like, how does that make you feel? What do you think she's really saying when she says that? Because you want him now to start looking and hunting for not what she says out of her mouth, but what is she not saying, though? And so modeling that in session, you know, as the provider, as the therapist, is really good. Yeah. Okay. Our next one is keep it relevant. So don't bring up old grudges or sore points when they don't belong in a particular argument. Put boundaries around the subject matter so that the fight doesn't deteriorate into a free-for-all. One of the things that you'll see couples do, especially when there's been a violation of trust, there's been infidelity in a relationship, is you will hear one of the people in the relationship constantly bringing up stuff that happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, all right? And they cannot let that go. Those grudges, those sore points is what we call them. And when we are talking and having that session, we're talking about this particular point within the Fighting Fair techniques, I'll ask the question, and I'm asking you, why do you think we have grudges and sore points? Why do you think we keep bringing up the same thing over and over again? What was that? It's unresolved. Absolutely. There's a reason why they keep bringing it up. It's unresolved. And typically the guy will say, well, I thought you forgave me. I thought we was over that. And she's like, no. You said you was done with it. I said, okay. I didn't say I was done with it, you know? So those grudges and those sore points are very important issues that have not been resolved. And what you got to make it clear to the couple is that while those are important and we need to respect those and we do need to deal with those, that's not what this fight is about, though. This fight is about respect. So we need to set a time and we need to deal with those grudges and those sore points. And I love it when I hear them say, but we don't know how to do that. That's why there's still grudges. That's why there's still sore points. Okay, well then that's where you and I will sit down and we will deal with it. I need you to make a list of those grudges and those sore points. And then we will, in another session, we will deal with those issues separately. But that's not what this fight is about. Go ahead.
What if this does happen. The argument is the trigger for the sore point. So it seems to them like they should be bringing it up. For example, infidelity over, I don't know, the phone or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're arguing about the phone, but then the infidelity comes up. So how do you go about figuring that out? Like when they connect, when a sore point connects to the argument at hand?
Absolutely. And you really need to try to make those separate things, separate issues. And we know they do go together. I mean, because that's where the infidelity started, was an emotional relationship over the telephone, all right? Is where it started. But that needs to be separated from the actual issue, though. And so those are two different things. And I'm going to say this, and for women, it's a little bit different because everything is intertwined and connected together for a woman's brain. So it's a lot more challenging to really separate those issues out because, oh no, those go together. We can't separate those. That's one and one. Is what that is. But for a guy, it's different. He's like, no, that's a totally separate thing. The telephone is one thing. The infidelity relationship is another. Those don't go together. And we're more linear in our thought process and systematic as to we are able to forgive, forget, and move on to the next thing. Where again, with the woman, that can be a little bit more challenging because there is no such thing as just blocking it out and moving on to the next thing. And so this is where, number one, I think we need to respect those differences in each other. And then I will employ the male in the relationship to be more empathetic to the female's thoughts and feelings when it comes to that issue. And then same thing for the woman in the relationship. I will implore her to be a little bit more empathetic and sensitive to the way his brain works when it comes to that. And it doesn't mean that one is right or wrong. They both are equally just as important, but we need to have some empathy when it comes to that, though. And so they really are two separate things, and this is where you need to be able to deal with that in a scenario where maybe when we talk about the phone, we have some very clear guidelines for telephone conversations. I just had a conversation with a patient, with a couple. There was some infidelity in this relationship and ongoing for, I think they've been together for about 40 years. And there's been some infidelity. And we talked about, in telephone, is how that relationship got started. And so we talked about him not having those conversations, taking phone calls outside of her presence until she felt safe. And so all telephone calls will be held, business and everything, with her present. And he will announce, instead of going, hello, excuse me for a minute, and walking off, he will, hello, Bob, you're calling about the scans that are due. Yeah, let me get that information for you. Sit down on the couch and I'll read them to you. So our agreement was that he will vocalize who was calling, what they were calling about, and then have that discussion out in the open in order to make her feel safe in the relationship. So they really are two separate things, even though having that conversation triggers, the feelings and thoughts that come along with the infidelity. But this is where we need to try to separate those out, increase empathy among each other for how we process things, how we see things, and then have some very clear expectations. Yeah. So don't bring up grudges or sore points when they don't belong in a particular argument. Keep your focus on what the fight is about, and that's what you fight about. The grudges and the sore points are something that need to be discussed in another session, all right? I know bring those up, and you say, listen to me, I know that's important, and we're going to deal with that, but that's not this session, okay? And you may need to have them look at, like I said, for guys, it's a lot easier to compartmentalize, to move on. But I wrote an article on how to forgive and forget early this year, and I'm actually working on a book that sort of elaborates on that article. And so you really, and I've passed out the handout to you guys before, but you really want to, those people who cannot let go of those grudges and those sore points, you really want to be able to walk them through how to forgive and forget. All right. So take them through those steps and help them terminate the issues with those things that have taken place in the past that they can't seem to let go. Yeah. So let's look at avoid character assassination. Somebody read that one.
Avoid character assassination. Stay focused on the issue rather than deteriorating to the point of attacking your partner personally. Don't let the fight degenerate into name calling.
Yeah, so stay focused on the issue rather than deteriorating to the point of attacking your partner. And the reason why is because the second you attack your partner by calling them out of their name, character assassination, talking about their mom or their dad or anything of that nature, as a matter of fact, the second we feel threatened in a conversation, we leave the precognitive part of our brain, the rational part of our brain, and we end up in the emotional part of our brain. So when we end up in the emotional part of our brain, guess what we're no longer doing? We're no longer listening. So now you're fighting with yourself. Now you're having that conversation with yourself because they're not able to rationalize and go, okay, let me try to interpret what he's saying. Let me try to interpret what she's saying. Let me try to understand. Now they're in defensive mode. They're in that limbic system, and they're trying to decide what you are. And before you know it, now it's just there's name calling. There's a full-blown on fight. And so the second you call somebody out of their name, you need to stop the fighting, take a break, reset, and then come back and attempt to have that conversation again. The second that person feels threatened, they are going to go into defensive or offensive mode. They're going to go back here is what they're going to, and remember that it takes a millisecond to go from here to here, a millisecond. But to come from here back up to here, it could take hours, days, and for some people, even weeks. So here, it's like a 16-lane highway. And from here to here, it's like a hill with one lane full of Amish people in carriages going up. All right? So it takes a while. So if you want that person to actually hear, to be present, and to engage in conversation, you've got to be able to control yourself. Because the second they feel threatened, the second you call them out of their name, you really need to have enough sense to say, you know what, I apologize, I'm so sorry. I'm going to stop, I'll go reset myself, and hopefully we can come back and we can address these issues. All right? Because trying to have that conversation now is really, you're asking for a big fight. You're asking to have to apologize later on because you said and you did things you really didn't mean. You know? And typically, we really don't mean it. We really don't mean to be that mean and nasty. But when we end up in the emotion part of our brain, it is a natural response to defend yourself. Hurt people hurt people. That's what they do, all right? So avoid character assassinations, any name calling, any shaming, using those negative labels, talking about the parents or their children are automatic defense mechanisms kick in, all right? So remain task-oriented. So know what you want going into the disagreement. If you don't have a goal in mind, you won't know when you've achieved it. I always encourage people, and we're so fortunate today to have, okay, Siri, okay, Google, take a note, write it down. And you'll be at work, you'll be in the car, and you'll be, oh, we need to talk about this. And I felt really upset about that. And you have all these things just pulsating through your brain, all this stuff you want to talk about. All right? And the best way to do that, the best system there is that you should write that down. You should record it and then have if the more organized you are when you fight, the less deterioration you will have. The more organized you are when you go into that conversation, that deep, meaningful conversation, the more tools you have to prepare, then the less distracted you're going to be. The less chances of it deteriorating and turning into this big, huge fight, because you have this list of what you want to talk about, and you go, and I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about that, and I felt disrespected when this happened, and you just deal with those issues one by one. And let me say this while we're here. Even though you don't resolve that issue after the first conversation, that's okay. You didn't get there overnight, so your problems typically are not going to be resolved in one conversation. You may need to have anywhere from 10 to 12 conversations about a certain issue before there's resolution for it. But at least you're having that conversation, you're diffusing, you're decreasing the cortisol, the adrenaline in your system, so you're not easily agitated and ready to fly off the handle. So it's okay to have several conversations about those issues. You don't have to resolve them all in one setting. But the more organized, the more structured your fights are, the less chances of them deteriorating into a free-for-all, okay? So I always suggest write it down. Remain task-oriented. Know what you want when you go into the fight. So when you get it, you keep your mouth shut and you terminate the fight. Don't get what you want, because I've literally had couples who come in and who will get what they want because they're being loud and intimidating, will get what they want, and then they can continue the fight. And the other person's like, you got what you want. Be quiet already. I said you can go. I said you can have it. And then we're following them up and down the steps. We're in the bathroom. Like, go away. You won, and they're still badgering you, So when you get what you want, be quiet. And we got to teach people this. Remember, because we typically don't have the natural propensity to fight fair. You have to teach people how to fight fair. They are already experts in dirty fighting, so now we have to teach them how to fight fair, all right? So write it down. And I know, and for guys, that's just not, something that you commonly do, unless your brain just works that way with lists. But it is a really good way of containing the situation and keeping control if you write it down. So write down what you want, so when you get it, you'll know when to be quiet. And say thank you and leave. And you don't have to justify it. You got it, so just be quiet and go away now, all right? Let's look at allow your partner to retreat with dignity. Somebody read that one.
Allow your partner to retreat with dignity. How an argument ends is crucial. Recognize when an olive branch is being extended to you, perhaps in the form of an apology or a joke, and give your partner a face-saving way out of the disagreement.
This is so incredibly important. I will often ask couples, do you know how Mary says, I'm sorry, Bob? And Bob will go, dear lights in his eyes. Okay. Mary, do you know how Bob says, I'm sorry? Well, he always wants sex afterwards. Okay. Well, she's got some kind of insight. And so, she's got some kind of insight. She figures that's how he says, I'm sorry, is that he wants to be intimate with her. But it's very important for partners to know how the other one says, I'm sorry, to know when the olive branch is being extended. What I find in my practice is that most people don't know how the other person says, I'm sorry. And so I will ask, Bob, how do you say I'm sorry? And Bob said, well, I'll brush up against her. I'll come in the kitchen. I'll say, what's for dinner? That's how I say I'm sorry. And she's looking. You see the surprise on her face that, oh, really? Because that's not how, that's not how she interprets that. you know? So it's important to know how we say we're sorry. And a lot of us will say, you know, those of us who do say, there's an overuse of I'm sorry, the overuse of I'm sorry, and it doesn't mean anything, it doesn't carry any weight, you know? But that's how they say I'm sorry. And so this is where you, as the skillful interviewer or therapist, you really help them understand, you know, what says I'm sorry for them, because it's different from men to women and from person to person. It is distinctly different. And so it is in the best interest of Mary to learn how Bob says I'm sorry, and it's in the best interest of Bob to learn how Mary says I'm sorry. So we need to spend a little time right here with teaching each other how I say I'm sorry and what does that mean for me. And it's okay, it may not be the sorry that you want, but that's okay though, but that's how he says I'm sorry. But we do want him to learn how to say you're sorry too, how you interpret sorry. We do. Remember, because this is a partnership. And so it's important. Bob has his way of saying I'm sorry. He likes physical touch. That's how he tells I'm sorry, says I'm sorry. For Mary, she wants to hear the words, and she wants action behind it. She doesn't want the same behavior to be repeated, okay? And so if we teach them that, now we can teach them to also be more receptive to the way that Bob says I'm sorry, other than just saying I'm sorry, and with the actions behind it. So now Bob needs to incorporate with his physical touch, action, and verbalization of I'm sorry. Everybody get that? Learning when, and you notice that for some people, when you sit down, you talk about, so how do you say, when you do this with several couples, you'll see people say I'm sorry by laughing. Guys typically will make jokes. That's how they say I'm sorry. They'll make a joke out of anything. You know, try to diffuse the situation, try to be a comedian by saying I'm sorry, all right? And for women, it can be really different the way they say I'm sorry. Women typically will say I'm sorry by proximity. They like to be close. So they will come near you, you know, is what they'll do when they're trying to say I'm sorry. They want to be in the same room, you know? They want, you know, they like the physical touch is what they like. So, but it's different again. That's a very general statement, but it's very different from person to person and from men to women. So it's important to recognize and to understand, to have empathy for how each of us say that we're sorry, okay? Any questions about that? Okay. There's a time limit. This is one of my favorite ones here. Never, ever have a fight. And when we talk about absolutes, this is an absolute. Never, ever have a fight after 8 o'clock at night. Why don't we have fights after 8 o'clock at night? All of those reasons. Exactly. 8 o'clock. We typically go to bed around 10, 11, 12 o'clock. So if you're fighting after 8, all of that cortisol and adrenaline is pulsating through your brain. And guess what you're not going to do? Sleep. Exactly. Because your brain is still in defensive or offensive mode. And you're laying there, the lights are out, it's quiet in the house, and your eyes are wide open. And you're like, this fool over here sleeping, and you still wide awake. And before you know it, the lights flick on, drawers are opening up, you know, you turn on TVs and waking everybody. I'm up, everybody in the house gonna be up. You know, so just don't fight after 8 o'clock at night. It's a horrible time to have those deep, meaningful conversations, which typically increase your blood pressure, the dopamine, the adrenaline, all in your brain, the stress chemicals in your brain are all pulsating, producing at high levels. And so typically you want the melatonin to start increasing after 8 o'clock. The melatonin that tells your brain, tells you, calm down, relax, we can go to bed. It's time for some, some R&R, some rest and relaxation. You cannot get into that REM sleep when you've had that fight after 8 o'clock at night. The sleep, that dreaming that you do is going to be fighting. Is what it's going to be. You know, something terrible. You're just not going to sleep well. And here we talk about from the dirty fighting techniques. You got to be careful when you do fight. Like, don't fight when people are sick. It's so mean to fight with your spouse and they're sick. You know they can't defend themselves. And then what if there's somebody's leaving and going out of town for a business trip, and you have that fight with them right before they leave and get into the cab to go to the airport? That is, you know they can't stay and defend and engage in the conversation because they have to be at work. But that's the moment so don't fight before they go to work. Don't fight when they're sick. Don't fight after 8 o'clock at night, all right? I always say set a time for fighting and a limit to that. One of the things that we did in our family growing up, while the kids were growing up, is we always had what was called family time. And our family time was around dinner time, roughly around 6 o'clock. And so that's when we had those deep, meaningful conversations, was around dinner time. The dinner table was a safe space to open up and share about anything without judgment. The dinner table was for us. And so whenever we made a decision, and we made a decision about anything, I know we didn't have a lot of say-so about where we were going to PCS in the military, where we're going to move next, but we gave the kids a voice. They were allowed to express themselves and state why they didn't want to move and why they didn't want to change school for the 16th time, and all of that. And I couldn't fix that, but at least their feelings were validated. We heard them, we listened to them. Even when it came to vacations, that's when we had those vacation conversations, was at the dinner table. That's when we were allowed to express ourselves again without judgment, but to state how you feel and why you feel that way and what you want to have happen. And the reason why you want to fight around dinner time, here's why I encourage fighting around dinner time. What happens when you pick up that spoon? You relax. Those happy chemicals are being produced in your brain. And that means that you are not as guarded. So you're not on the defensive. You're not ready. You're not expecting and listening to, anticipating what they're going to say so you can have a response. Because you're eating, you're relaxed, you're calmer. Yeah, exactly. So having those conversations around dinner times, you increase the possibility of actually being able to be heard. And people are less defensive. They're less defensive when they're eating, because automatically, without even thinking about it, the science shows that when you're lifting a fork or a spoon up to your mouth, those chemicals are being released that make you happy, to calm you down, to relax you. So you just got to find a time to do that that's best for you. And then I always say, especially when you start off, don't fight for more than 10 minutes. Fight for only 10 minutes or only 15 minutes. Don't fight for hours. Don't let the fight go on indefinitely. Don't start a fight at 6 and 2 o'clock in the morning, you're still fighting about the same thing. Just don't do that. Fight for about no more than a half an hour, especially when you're first starting off. Typically, I say fight about an hour, and it's okay to fight every day. It's okay to have a structured fight every single day, 7 days a week. It's okay. It's okay. And remember, you don't have to resolve everything in that first setting. And this is where we talk about the cognitive approach to relationships. There has to be this paradigm shift in the way we think and the way we do things, the way we interact with each other. You have to retrain people's brains on how to do this the right way, cognitive restructuring. So I say 6 o'clock at night, you start that fight. 30 minutes after, you say, okay, we didn't resolve this. We're not finished with this, but we're done with this conversation for tonight. And you lock it down. You lock it down, and you go on. You continue the night, being nice, being kind to each other, and all of that. And then you just come back the next day, and you start it over again. And you have that conversation again. And remember, I told you guys earlier that sometimes it takes having that fight, 10 to 12 times it takes having that fight in order to resolve those issues. And when you can't resolve those issues on your own, it may mean that they need to have an individual or another session about that particular issue to try to bring some resolution to it. And we'll talk more about the conflict resolution a little bit later on. Any questions about the time limit? Arguments should be temporary so that they don't get out of hand and don't allow the ugliness of the argument to stretch on indefinitely. Any questions? No? All right, let's look at listen to learn.
Listen to learn. When we fight, it's actually an attempt to communicate our feelings. Allowing someone to be heard often diffuses a hostile situation. And when someone is hurt and they are yelling and screaming, allow them time to vent before you respond.
Yeah, so, and here's what we mean by that. Like, you'll have somebody who is animated, who is expressing themselves. They are just, they're getting all of that pent up stuff out. And it's very natural for us to want to respond. No, that's wrong. No, that's not true. It's very natural for us to want to interrupt them and correct them along the way. But when you have somebody who's just and getting that stuff out, you need to allow them to decompress. You need to allow them to expel all that toxic buildup that they have. All right? And what you do, this is how you can tell that you're actually listening to them. If you are, number one, coming up with your response, you're not listening. If you are taking a note and counting how they're wrong, you're probably not listening to them, all right? But if you can listen to what they say, continue to breathe, and you got to watch yourself, because you'll be so caught off guard sometimes by this because it's been built up in them, and now they're just unloading on you, and it catches you off guard. You're not even breathing, you're sort of holding your breath because you don't know if you should hit them or if you should run. It was a joke, y'all. But they're unloading on you. And so remember to breathe. Take a deep breath while they're talking. And what you want to look for is when they have that natural breath of that. When they do like that, that means the cortisol, the stress chemical in their brain, is starting to recede. And in return, this is when you say, okay, can I respond? And they're like, no, I'm not finished. And you go, okay, go ahead and finish. And you let them finish. And then you say, okay. And you see them take that natural breath again. And you say, can I respond? Say, yes. And now you get a chance to respond and state why you thought they were wrong or whatever it is. Validate how they feel. But you really want to give them a chance to get that out. That's what you want to do. And then wait for that natural breath that you'll see people take. You watch little kids, like when they've been yelling, having a temper tantrum, they'll, that's what they'll do. They'll just sort of do that, and you know what that is? That's the cortisol in their brain receding to its normal level. And so they're calming down, and now you can engage. When they're having a temper tantrum, and you're like, Bob, if you don't get up off that floor, they're not listening to you. They can't hear you. Their brain is being saturated with chemicals, and the only thing they can think of right now is getting that out. There's a toxic dump from their system to get that. Same thing happens to adults when you see them just with all that information, just spitting it out. They're doing a toxic dump, and you got to give them a chance to allow those chemicals in their brain to recede to their normal levels before you start to engage. So, when we fight, it is actually an attempt to communicate our feelings. Allowing someone to be heard would often diffuse a hostile situation. When you allow them to get all of that out, and you say, are you finished? And like, yes, I'm done. I just had to get it out, Now you've diffused the situation instead of you engaging because now you're angry that they just did all of that, going off on you, arguing with you. And so now you want to engage in that, which is a natural thing to want to do because, again, you end up here when you feel like you're being attacked. And so you want it, but that's not the time to respond. Or that's not the time to respond in that way. That is the time when you need to check to make sure, are you finished? To get all that out. And now to engage, because it keeps you from going here, and it keeps you here in the rational part of your brain where you can absorb information and respond to what's being said. When someone is hurt and they are yelling and screaming, allow them to respond. Any questions about that? Okay. So last one. Be proportional in your intensity. Every single thing you disagree with about is not an earth-shattering event or issue. Just because you have a right to be mad does not mean you have to be mad. All right? Just because you have a right to be mad doesn't mean you have to be mad. Nobody says you have to be mad and show it just because you're mad. We do acknowledge that you have a right. Everybody has a right to be mad when you do. But not everything we fight about is an earth-shattering event. Not everything we fight about is reason for divorce. Not everything we fight about is reason to sleep on the couch tonight. Not everything we fight about is a reason to fall out about, all right? It's okay to be mad. Just because you have a right to be mad does not mean you have to show it. Does not mean you have to be mad, okay? So you have to learn to be proportional. Not everything you do or everything they do is an earth-shattering event. Like some things is just because. You got to be able to let things go. You got to know when to engage in that fight, when to come back, when to state how you feel. Every single time you fight does not mean it have to end ugly, okay? So be proportional in your intensity when it comes to fighting. And of course, we give some more examples here on how to fight fair. You really want to home in and teach people again using those I statements is really important, okay? And again, I tell you, women tend to do a lot better with I statements than guys do. Just a fact, I did a study with Marines and with Army personnel, and I found that the Marines actually did a lot better with the I statements than the soldiers did. Yeah, which I thought the Army, the soldiers would do a lot better with the I statements. I'm thinking, you know, I don't say this on camera, higher education, a lot smarter, that they would adjust to the I statements and be like, oh, yeah, that's right, I statements work. That makes perfectly good sense. But man, they had the roughest time with the I statements. That's not how I talk. That's not normal. To go, I feel, and just mock it. They would mock me and everything, and using the I statement. But the Marines would listen and then just do it. And they always came back and reported how well the I statements worked for them, how it changed their lives. It's like totally, yeah, that hypothesis was completely wrong. It was completely wrong there. But guys typically have a harder time, but you know, you want to reinforce those I statements is what you want to do. So let's end right here and let's take a break, all right? Take a break here, and then we'll come back, and I do have a scenario that we'll do. We'll bring some people up, and we'll talk a little bit about, we'll do one of the sessions as a couple is what we'll do, okay? All right, so break time.